It is quite a popular activity of academics, commentators, and influencers alike to try and provide psychical or psychological accounts of fictional characters. This can be a means for renewed interest and engagement with artistic forms, creative practices, and a revitalised and renewed critique of pop culture. One of Ernest Jones' most famous pieces, as a Welsh psychoanalyst, was a text looking into the Oedipus complex and Shakespeare's Hamlet. Lionel Trilling will make the statement that it's all well and good to apply psychoanalytic and psychodynamic theory to fictional worlds and peoples, but in the end, none of these characters have childhoods or are developed, simply because they aren't real. Now, I agree with this to a certain extent, that what do we really gain from creating elaborate psychobiographies and speculative histories of particular fictional characters when these sorts of efforts can be applied to the real world? Then again, might these characters not serve as primary exemplars for certain neuroses, psychoses, and mental states that we see all the time in waking life? Shingeki no Kyojin, otherwise known as Attack on Titan, is a manga series that has been recently adapted into anime form through several series. Originally illustrated by Hajime Isayama and adapted into audio-visual format by WIT and more recently MAPPA Studios. We largely follow the character growth of Eren Yeager, who witnesses his mother being killed as his hometown is invaded by great hulking giants called Titans. Eren goes along several arcs as he is part of the Survey Corps, a military group responsible for scouting beyond the city walls and gathering as much knowledge as they can on the Titans. With Eren's progression and the story in general, we learn a lot more about the nature of the Titans. To a degree, their origin does lie somewhere within human control, but also carries an odd metaphysical aspect to it as well. But without going too much further into this, the most recent releases in the manga and the anime series have turned this entire dimension on its head. The power of Titans has been utilised and weaponized by nation-states for the purpose of supranational control and subjugation. As such, the most recent arc of Attack on Titan is a shift from an action, horror, mystery form of narrative to one that is political and socio-cultural. Reiner Braun, who up until this point has been perceived as an antagonist in the series, is a central figure in this latter socio-political arc. Despite what I have said about what we can gain from analysing fictional characters, Reiner as an antagonised and antagonist character in the narrative largely corresponds with the psychological phenomenon known as split personality disorder. As such, this investigation is divided into three parts. Firstly, how his character embodies what Melanie Klein refers to as the paranoid schizoid position. Second, an excursus into the relevance of the armoured titan which he has the ability to turn into, to political metaphor and political subjectivity, in addition to how this complements Reiner's position as a split subject. And thirdly, the depressive position to Melanie Klein, within which the ego faces potential annihilation as much as a possibility for creative solution. What I hope you will gain from this investigation are insights into basic psychoanalytic concepts in accordance with Melanie Klein and Jacques Lacan specifically, as well as of course a fun excursion into the mind of a fictional character from a very well beloved anime series. And I must say off the bat quickly, I apologise for the quality of the audio and maybe the quietness of my voice throughout this video. I'm still getting used to using a microphone. Either way, I'd greatly appreciate it if you sat through the majority of this video, and I do recommend you sit down with a hot beverage of your choice, or play an easy video game in the background as I slowly wade my way through this psychical quagmire which is Reiner Braun. And with that, I'll make a start.
泣き止んだらすぐ来いよ。遅いと俺が隊長にどやされんだからさ。
ライナー、すまない。立ってよ、ライナー。さあ。俺は荒れ地になって母さんと父さんと3人で暮らすんだ。13年も待ってられない。でもあいつの言う通り俺飛べだから。継承者を決めるのはポルコじゃない。それに忠誠心は大事だと思うけどねえ兄。
何？聞いてなかった。
でもいいの。そんな目標があるのに。
え
13年しかないんだよ。
13年で英雄になるんだろ。パラディと悪魔を成敗すれば世界を救えるんだ。そしたら俺は世界一の自慢の息子になれるんだ。
What is of interest in Reiner Braun's character is that he's not simply split on psychological grounds, but he also has this fantastic ability to shift into one of the 9 titans, since he holds the power of the armoured titan. When he is undercover on Paradis in the Survey Corps, he is split politically insofar as he must blend in with the people of Paradis, as well as remember his mission as a warrior, a soldier for the Marley nation. What I wish to do through a Kleinian analysis of Reiner's character, his splits, even if fantastically physical and political, is to ascribe to him the position of being a paranoid schizoid, rather the persistent regression to this position. It is a position that is key for childhood development, yet can remain unresolved if via trauma there's been no opportunity for resolution. I'll provide a quote by Hannah Segal in her introduction to the work of Melanie Klein. The leading anxiety in the paranoid schizoid position is that of the persecutory object or objects will get inside the ego and overwhelm and annihilate both the ideal object and the self. These features of the anxiety and object relationships experienced during this phase of development led Melanie Klein to call it the paranoid schizoid position. Since the leading anxiety is paranoid, and the state of the ego and its objects is characterized by the splitting, which is schizoid. You certainly don't need to go that far into Reiner's character in the manga and the anime to find exactly where he has these splits. I think it would benefit firstly to look at the general sort of splits he has in his ideologue to himself firstly. Primarily the idealization of Marley, and secondly the denied devils of Paradis. Consider the scene where Reiner is on the warrior training squad and he is accused by Porco of having nothing to his character in terms of strength, agility or intelligence beyond his mere perseverance and adherence to Marleyan doctrine. Other than that, he has nothing else that really puts him above any of the rest of his colleagues. As such, why should he have any expectation of himself to inherit one of the 9? The answer to this lies in Reiner's response to Porco's accusations with further, even more severe accusations of him not understanding the breadth and depth of the mission they're on and of being an Eldian restorationist. Interestingly, this is the precise opposite of the idealized Marley loyalist, the usurper that is underneath and lying within the Marley nation, ready to sabotage it from within. This object of the denied Eldian is the opposite of the idealized Marleyan. As such, sits on the other side of this split, the split that constitutes Reiner's psyche. Of course, this only ends in tears for Reiner, as he is subsequently beaten by Porco. There is a very similar set of events that occurs to Reiner on Paradis after the unexpected death of Marcel, and he considers that the group should head back to Marley what they have, hoping to recover the Jaw Titan as well. When Reiner responds with the same level of patriotism, Annie responds by accusing him of assemblant nature, and once again coming to blows. By this point I hope to have covered enough of what constitutes Reiner's ego from the idealized side, but what about the thing which he is less conscious of? Hajime Isayama actually provides us an insight into Reiner's infantile life, through a scene between himself and his mother. Reiner learns 2 very important facts through this single intimate moment with his mother. Firstly, about the penitence that must be paid by the Eldians to the Marleyan people, through caging themselves in ghettos and sacrificing themselves for the betterment of the nation on the part of their own people's sins. The second is a much more real aspect of Reiner's own history, that being the nature of his father as a Marleyan. It is illegal, of course, for Marleys to procreate with Eldians, and it is further evident that Reiner's mother greatly resents the fact they are a split family. Through what could be understood as the idealization of his own mother unconsciously, via the adherence to Marleyan doctrine, he renders Eldians and further the unrepenting sinful demons of Paradis as abject, To throw a speculative span into the works further, I would want to presume that he actually resents his father like he resents the Eldians, and that possibly sits as an unconscious fact in his psyche that is masked by an incredible adherence to the abjection of the Eldian people. What I mean here, in short, is that he consciously idealizes the Marleyan people and his role as a warrior, while unconsciously idealizing what his mother teaches him and what she represents, while he is abject to the Eldian people and the demons and unpenitent people of Paradis, whilst unconsciously resenting his father's absence and thus split nature of his family. Of course, when he does finally meet his father for the single and only time, he is met with hostility on the part of his father, that he does not wish for them to be reunited as a family, and he himself actually being in his workshop is a serious threat to Reiner's father's rights as a Marleyan citizen, since it would certainly prove that he had procreated with an Eldian. His father's response, representing the denied and abject side of Reiner's ego, is a threat of absolute annihilation of the ego in its entirety, since this abject side of the split, which Reiner and his mother resents, can overwhelm the idealized side. As such, we see that Reiner represses this encounter entirely and keeps moving along with his adherence to Marleyan doctrine, despite the fact that he knows deeply, unconsciously, that it is all just a semblance, just like his hopes and dreams for a reunited family. Without going too far into the Oedipus complex, I would want to refer to Reiner's state of mind at this point in his childhood as unresolved. As such, he has remained in the paranoid schizoid phase somewhat, or has regularly found himself returning to it throughout his life, because he has not been able to find a means by which to realise the semblant aspects of his fantasies, his idealizations, his abjections, but he's only been able to repress them. He's only been able to deny them through further neurotic behaviour in his adherences to Marley, his objections to Eldia, and his so-called responsibilities. So hopefully through that very complicated point, I've been able to illustrate his split ideal and denying side in addition to their dimensions on conscious and unconscious planes. It really wasn't my intention to get caught up in this small section for so long, but it's so easy to just get caught up in the multifaceted dimensionality of Reiner's character and how well he's written for a non-protagonist. Nevertheless, at this point, we ought to move on to his young adult phase, where he appears most in the series and the manga, and his regressions to split states of mind, and returns to paranoid schizoid states of mind. Further, I think it's worth explaining what exactly are his schizophrenic facets, and what are his paranoid facets. The first young adult point of regression, or at least signal of regression, I'd like to point out when Reiner is working with the Paradis Survey Corps undercover, when he saves Connie Springer from a Titan. Incredibly thankful to Reiner, Connie asks Berthold whether Reiner was always the saving type. Berthold responds in an interesting manner, saying that Reiner used to be the warrior type. Understandably, there's quite a few interpretations you can give to what Berthold says here. Reiner has just saved one of the so-called enemies of Marley, a devil Eldian, from a Titan. Then again, I think there's something more to look into here, and that is, on one side, Berthold sees that Reiner has somewhat improved on being just a warrior who adheres to ideas of Marleyan supremacy. Further, Reiner's response, in absolute dumbfounded confusion what Berthold says, is an interesting key to his very literal schizophrenic nature. When Reiner asks what Berthold is talking about, I do not believe that is simply him remaining undercover. I think that's the basis, that he really has split his personality in two as an adult. That he is currently adhering to the side where he wants to support his brethren in the Survey Corps. You could say this is somewhat of a synthesis between the abject and the idealized, in the idea of idealizing your fellow Eldian Survey Corps members, but it's still nonetheless unresolved, because Reiner still remains completely oblivious here to his mission as a warrior for Marley. Again, to remind ourselves of Klein's definition of schizophrenia, the schizoid position, it is about you being split, your ego split, one side being one that you incorporate whilst the other attempts to attack and annihilate the other side, that they both work against each other, and thus can more or less manifest as hallucinatory things or as complete amnesia states of mind towards other halves of the ego and its experiences. The second point of regression to the paranoid schizoid position I'd like to point out is in Marco's death, which we of course see early on in the story, yet we get a good insight into it later on. It turns out that Marco overheard a conversation between a reunited Reiner, Berthold, and Annie about what their plans were in taking down the walls after Aaron's success in blocking it. Marco overhears them referring to their own respective titans. As such, they do not sit idly whilst it's possible that Marco could bring in this information back to the Survey Corps. As such, they subdue him, and whilst Reiner has Marco captured in his arms, he orders for Annie to take off his ODM gear, the only means he would have to escape death by Titan. Annie, with great reluctance, follows Reiner's orders and removes his gear, leaving Marco to be eaten alive by a Titan. In a very similar state of shock to what we referred to prior, Reiner exclaims from afar, "Why is Marco being eaten?" Here, Reiner has regressed to the paranoid schizoid position in an inverse manner to the prior, where he was, in conversation with Annie and Berthold, a warrior for Marley, and all the while he's preparing Marco for his death. He only then switches back to being a member of the Survey Corps, where he's remarking how horrific it is to see his friend's death. Let us clarify here then what precisely makes this paranoid as well as schizoid. The paranoid side of things comes from the ego's anxious reaction to the reality of splitting. As such, when Reiner makes this switch, as we've seen prior in his splitting moments, he is exiting one state of mind and re-entering in another through anxiety. This reality is briefly apparent for him through the sense of anxiety that he is split. Very similar to when his father told him that he did not want to be reunited again with his mother, Reiner repressed this anxious moment. This anxiety recurs at every point the split becomes apparent to him, and as such becomes the signal for him to then repress it once more. As such, he is paranoid of these moments, and as such paranoid of his opposite facets of his ego, as well as the fact that he's split in the first place. The third regressive example I will cover is one incredibly familiar to everybody who watches the anime, and certainly, given the themes I've talked about, is the best example of Reiner facing his split ego. This being when Reiner and Berthold reveal to Eren and the Survey Corps the fact that they are the armoured and colossal titans. In another unresolved synthesis of the idealized and abject, Reiner jovially reveals to Eren that he is, alongside Berthold, responsible for the destruction of Eren's own hometown. All that Berthold can do is look on with absolute awe and terror with what Reiner is revealing to their enemies. I will let Wit Studios' own fantastic direction of this scene speak for itself.
ライナーは疲れているんだ。大体な、お前が人類を殺しまくった鎧の巨人なら、なんでそんな相談を俺にしなくちゃなんねんだ。そんなこと言われて、俺が「はい行きます」ってうなずくわけがねえだろ。
そうか、その通りだよな。何を考えてるんだ俺は。本当におかしくなっちまったのか。
This is the first instance of Reiner facing up to his split nature in a manner that we might call courageous. What he does next, regardless of the morality of his decision, is a courageous act, like he does when he faces his father and subsequently represses that memory. Yes, courage does require an air of repression, because how else are we going to escape our own anxious uncanniness and make do with the promises we made to people, to ourselves, and to the world? In Reiner's case, regardless of its correctness, it is fulfilling his oath as a warrior.
そうか。 ここに長く居すぎてしまったんだな。バカな奴らに囲まれて3年も暮らしたせいだ。俺たちはガキで何一つ知らなかったんだよ。こんな奴らがいるなんて知らずにいれば、俺はこんな半端なクソ野郎にならずに済んだのに。もう俺には何が正しいことなのかわからん。ただ俺のすべきことは自分のした行いや選択に対し戦士として最後まで責任を果たすことだ。ライダー、やるんだな、今ここで。ああ、勝負は今ここで決める。
To take the terminology of Jacques Lacan, another psychoanalyst, Reiner faces the real or reality here for the first time. That he is a split subject, that he is unfamiliar with his own actions, and that he is not sure of what the world sees of him. As such, he makes the decision to fulfill the one thing he's stuck to his entire life so far, and that is to the oath of being a warrior. In courageously escaping the anxious real and moving to what Lacan will call the symbolic, he takes on the first word, the first notion of reason, that he is a warrior. By the way, let's talk about that. Hopefully that serves as a good break from what is probably the worst ASMR voice you've ever heard. I want to apologise again that this is definitely a new thing for me, hearing the sound of my own voice through a microphone, and I will try to do better as we keep going. So this section is oriented around Reiner's particular ability to inherit and use one of the powers of the 9 Titans, being the Armoured Titan. What this power represents about him, and how it complements his already split and troubled psyche. In short, Ymir, whom all the Eldians descend from, was the first founding Titan, which became the first of the 9 Titan powers, the rest of the 8 being created by Ymir for particular purposes and tasks, primarily in waging war. The founding Titan Ymir and the 9 Titans, as well as all of their descendants, were born and inherited the Titans out of a time of war. Reiner and his colleagues have inherited the powers of the 9 in a very interesting time and place, given the storyline of the Attack on Titan universe. It is at a point where the mechanisms for waging war, machines and technologies have even superseded the powers of the 9 Titans. Because of this, the powers of the 9 and further the Eldian people's place under Marley is very tenuous, as Marley is realising that they cannot rely on the Titan powers to remain a global political superpower forever. As for the first time, it is now possible to kill a Titan without the usage or co-option of another Titan power. It is simply possible with a large enough gun. So why was it that Reiner inherited the Armoured Titan? Theo McGath, the commander of the Warrior program, talks about Reiner's inherent perseverance and stalwartness of character as suitable for the tasks of the Armoured Titan. This sounds reasonable enough. However, bear in mind that the only reason that Reiner is there to inherit the Armoured Titan is because Marcel prohibited his brother Porco from inheriting it himself. Reiner was simply the next candidate in line. It would be interesting to consider Porco's ability to actually wield the Armoured Titan, given that, very similar to Marcel and the Jaw Titan, he is very quick-witted, and rather more suited for the Jaw Titan, as we see after he reclaims it. This is mere canonical speculation nonetheless. Semblant, fake or no, Reiner and his character are well suited for the armoured titan. Let me further elaborate that Reiner's neurosis, his persistent regression to paranoid schizoid states of mind and split personality, make him suited for the armoured titan. Because what does armour do? It shields and protects from damage and violence, but it also serves as a mask of the face and of the body, prohibiting people from seeing the original vulnerability underneath. Each one of the 9 titans, and even the pure titans, are capable of exhibiting some form of emotion. Take for example Zeke's Beast Titan and Annie's Female Titan. Then consider the surreal and absurd facial expressions that are locked in the faces of most pure titans. Every physically manifest titan masks or protects some form of humanity. Reiner's titan goes further insofar as there's very little you can see through Reiner's own titan. It's a very locked and plated face, where you can only really see difference with the opening and closing of the mouth. I think something that's particularly terrifying is that, as revealed in Season 4 and later in the manga, when the warrior candidates are still children, their manifest titan form does not correlate with their age. The people of Shiganshina district, of course, are scarred with the images of a colossal titan and a heavily armoured titan breaking down the walls and changing life forever, completely unknown of the fact that deep inside both of those titans were children. Despite the general variance of deformities in pure titans and the 9 titan powers, they still resemble something of an outline of an adult human being. So Reiner and Berthold, when they are using their titans, are reflected through an outline of them as adults, and they are expected to behave as adults in waging war against other nations when inside of their titans. This is the masking I am talking about, the masking of reason and of symbolic authority and place, on top of the inherent truth and reality that they are still children. I think this frankly original point drives home the fact that Reiner continually regresses to a childlike state of mind, that of this primordial anxiety when faced with the father and the mother, despite his resolute outward character. Let's put this in Lacanian terms again. Bruce Fink, in his text The Lacanian Subject Between Language and Jouissance, says what cannot be said in language is not part of its reality. It does not exist, strictly speaking. In Lacan's terminology, existence is a product of language. Language brings things into existence, makes them part of human reality. Things which had no existence prior to being ciphered, symbolized, or put into words. The real, therefore, does not exist. What do we mean here? So, when Reiner revealed his nature as the armored titan to the Cervical and to Eren, he traversed the real. He went through a process where his world fell apart and went into egoic oblivion. He picked himself up again and regained his ego through adherence to a symbol, that of being a warrior. Being a warrior means that Reiner exists. He exists through a symbolic chain, a purpose, and therefore a sense of time and place through his purpose as a warrior. The real is when he faces the fact that it is semblant, as has been revealed to him several times via his colleagues and the world as a whole. The reality of his semblant nature cannot be put into words, which is why he meets it with silence, and responds to it either with words or with violence, with being a warrior or turning into the armoured titan. The armoured titan serves as a pretty good Jekyll-Hyde scenario here, insofar as his switch to the armoured titan masks something entirely and denies another half entirely within him, reinforcing this split state of mind. When Reiner is a warrior, when he is masked and armoured by his titan, he insists to be like the symbolic, and he denies reality.
Taだやるべきことをやる。ただ進み続ける。それしかねえだろ。 巨人を一匹残らず駆逐するんだろう。お前ならやれる。
このままじゃダメだ。
In the paranoid schizoid position, the main anxiety is that the ego will be destroyed by the bad object or objects. In the depressive position, anxieties spring from ambivalence, and the child's main anxiety is that its own destructive impulses have destroyed or will destroy the object he loves and totally depends on. Beyond simply what Klein means in the depressive position, I think depression can be well predicated with the term fatalism. In many cases, the goodness in life is gone and it is my fault. And now all I feel is ambivalence, given there is nothing else I can do to account for the fact that I have lived a conflicted life, that I have led separate lives, and that they cannot coexist or become synthesized. The depressive position, however, is something that we are always working through. It constitutes what it's like to be an adult, let alone be somebody who can understand the breadth and struggles of relating to other people. And just because there is no permanent way to subdue the depressive position doesn't mean that we cannot find creative ways to live with it and to account for its issues. Let me briefly assert that in childhood development, the depressive position is somewhat dealt with through creativity, through play, and learning languages. The same ideas are repeated in adulthood, where creativity, relationships, activities, and whatever helps you work through the depressive position. Further, to find some synthesis between what is good and what is bad. Yet even these minor syntheses of situations are always semblant, only ever temporary. However, that also implies that you can also do nothing. You can sit in ambivalence and anticipate and welcome the parts of yourself in the world that will destroy the good things in life you have held dear. Reiner Braun's conflicted life comes to a head during the final fight in Shigenshina upon the death of Berthold and his saving by Zeke. Strangely, upon his return to Marley, his life simply begins to repeat again. Despite his many failures in his mission on Paradis, he is still a warrior, he still wages wars for Marley, and he still holds the armoured Titan. The lack of change in Reiner's role as a warrior, despite killing hundreds, and his own life being on the line several times, is the antecedent for his consequent ambivalent life upon returning to Marley. He is not a warrior because he wants to, or because he can reaffirm himself with Marleyan doctrine, or render the Eldians and Paradis abject. He does it just because there's nothing else to do. Scenarios that would have previously ignited a regression to the paranoid schizoid situation no longer achieves anything. For example, when Reiner first meets Porco again after the battle at Fort Slava, Porco accuses him of being constantly saved over and over again by various different people, obviously implying the fact that his own brother had saved Reiner at the cost of his life. Reiner can only respond in an ambivalent assertion that this might have been the case. This is further exemplified through the sense of debt that Reiner feels towards Marcel, him giving his life and allowing Reiner to actually become a warrior, despite Marcel's intentions to protect Porco instead. Porco now knows that Reiner wanted to be his brother. In some ways, this is the last nail in the coffin for a sense of depressive ambivalence in Reiner, since not only are his ideals and objections semblant, but his ways to account for them are just as semblant, like trying to behave like somebody else. But for pity's sake, let's acknowledge the elephant in the room, Reiner's desire to die. Reiner has anticipated his own death even in the Battle of Shigenshina, where he was captured by Hanji and the Survey Corps and questioned. At this point, he does acknowledge some of the good things that have come in his life, yet are certainly gone forever for him, like his peculiar love for Christa Lenz, otherwise known as Historia Ries, by at least asking Hanji to pass on a letter from Ymir to Krista. This Ymir, not this one. I'm not really sure why this is a thing. Before being killed, Zeke then pulls him out the gutter one more time, later exclaiming how lucky he is to be alive. I sincerely doubt Reiner feels particularly lucky. You've already seen that opening scene where Reiner actively tries to commit suicide using a rifle, but this is so well complemented with the concurrent dialogue between Reiner and Eren, giving advice and producing a friendship with his most vowed enemy. This scene must, for Reiner, embody his reflection on his conflictual life up until now, the realization of his paranoid schizophrenia. It is an extremely impactful scene, not solely on the part of what Reiner has been through, but on the pressures that are put upon the warrior candidates, how the Mali nation sincerely entrusted committing war crimes to literal children. Reiner sits on the verge of ending his life, anticipating complete egoic destruction on the part of his conflictual life in the world. Nonetheless, he does find his particular creative and active solutions to deal with the depressive position. One key development out of the depressive position for Klein is the recognition not of part objects or split objects of the ego and the world, but of whole objects and whole people. In other words, the realization that people are people in themselves, rather than either things to be idealized or to become abject. This recognition of the whole object, the whole person, comes in Falco's interruption of Reiner's suicide attempt, in his bashing on the wall trying to get his attention. While Reiner gasps for air and is in shock at what he's just tried to do, he realizes what is going to keep him going, these being Falco and Gabi as the next warrior candidates, both seeking to inherit Reiner's armoured titan. Falco and Gabi can be regarded as innocent people, mere children, filled with Malian doctrine and resolve to wage war against Eldia and the surrounding nations, yet still innocent in the eyes of Reiner, and importantly, a chance for redemption, a chance to stop this repetition. Gabi, of course being of the same family as Reiner, sees him as an ideal figure or person. Falco does so as well, through aspiring to take his position as the owner of the armoured titan. When Reiner protects Falco from Eren during the ensuing battle in Liberio, he finds himself again in a strange case of ambivalence, locked away in a hardened cage he used to protect Falco with his titan powers. Falco, Gabi and the others call from outside for Reiner to help, to use his armoured titan to subdue Eren, but we hear his inner monologue, the same mantra, the desire to rest, the desire to die. Reiner's resolution to protect and fight for his friends using his titan is done through a very intriguing artistic rendition on the part of Hajime Isayama. The armoured titan ascends from the rubble largely without its normal plating, and with an exact replication of Reiner's face. Without seeking too much out of mere metaphor, I really admire this motif, as it shows a strange, reluctant, yet strong and present synthesis of the ideal and abject in Reiner, between the armoured titan and his real body. Perhaps this marks the turning point for Reiner to decide to keep going, not for himself, but for the people he cares about. From this point I had planned on talking about later issues of the manga and how Reiner goes on seeking resolution for his conflicts and crimes in the past. On one hand, I don't want to throw in too many spoilers for anime watchers, but on the other hand, I think that this account actually captures Reiner for the majority of the rest of the manga anyways, as he continues to seek resolution and to keep going, fighting and persisting for the sake of those that he loves, Gabi, Falco, his mother, and his friends. Given this account alone, I think it'll be interesting to think about how Reiner survives the ensuing battles to come. Not necessarily in his character preservation in the story, but how he survives through the people he loves and cares about. How what he's done wrong can serve as a good lesson for those who are going to take on his responsibilities. However, we will have to just wait and see for what Hajime Isayama brings about in the final issues of Attack on Titan. One thing I consider in light of this investigation is definitely how much more I could have gone into looking at Reiner's character, his many facets and dimensions worthy of analysis. For example, there are the various moments by which he hints to his warrior role during training events with the Survey Corps back in season 1 of the anime and early on in the manga. Additionally, there is a very explicit scene of Reiner's split personalities when they're in the Forest of Giant Trees, having captured Eren and Ymir. Finally, what might have been worth some serious analysis was the anime rendition of Reiner's confessions to Eren in the basement whilst Willy Tybur is giving his speech. As you know, however, especially the first section, I was afraid of this investigation becoming too bloated with specific cases. Additionally, since I'm coming at this psychoanalytically, it can be a lot more satisfying and refreshing to find such huge character-defining traits in only those minor exchanges. Anyway, if you have any thoughts on these particular scenes or more that I haven't mentioned, given my methodology and thoughts, or an entirely different method, please feel free to comment below. If I could find a brief enough means to summate what this investigation has brought, however, I'd want this to be an account of what it means to be defensive, what it means to love and to hate, and what it means to give up, to get up, and to keep going. I really admire Reiner's character and how a fictional world does so well to encompass such a common mental disorder that is endemic to every single one of us at some point in our lives. As such, despite the fact I am not a psychoanalyst, let alone anyone who's licensed to say what things are or what things aren't, that you can still take away from this investigation and think about people you know, people you see and you hear of who behave in similar manners, and consider what's going on inside of their psyches, how people constitute themselves, how they see themselves and see the world. Finally, a brief personal note. As you can tell, this is the first video on my channel, and I do have something of a desire to keep going with these kinds of videos, whether it be relative to psychoanalysis, sociology, philosophy, politics, what have you, intertwined with either fiction or non-fiction. Of course, if you want me to produce more of this kind of content, certainly like and subscribe, but I'm also considering setting up a wee Patreon if people have specific ideas of what they want me to produce. As such, you can contribute straight to me so that I can put together videos based upon your own recommendations and desires for content. I had a great amount of fun putting this video together, and I really do enjoy video editing and recording audio, even if I do sound like absolute crap. Either way, comment your thoughts below, and thank you ever so much for watching. Bye bye.